Hello, Dr. Cath here again, and today we're going to talk about Shropshire Summer. It's really fabulous time of year to be out and about. And of course, Shropshire has a huge range of different habitats, very varied, large county, so there's plenty of things to go out and have a look at. And when I started preparing this talk, I thought, well, how can I do it? There's so much to talk about. And so I've divided it up into a selection of places that I'm going to be visiting over the summer and some of the things I'm hoping to see there, and hoping it will inspire you to get out and have a look at some of the same places. So the first one I really like in the summer is the Cypress Stones. There's, of course, a wonderful ridge of heathers and bilberries and rocks and birds and insects, and a wonderful wild place to go to. Just a quick word about the heathers. Of course, the Slibberstone Ridge was the basis of the Back to Purple landscape project with Natural England and the Forestry Commission and Shropshire Wildlife Trust and other partners. And the aim was to remove conifer plantations that had been put up there, which was completely the wrong thing to have up there, really, and bring back the natural vegetation. And it started in 1998, and it's still ongoing as bits of land become available that can be brought back to purple. So the purple is the heather, and we have three kinds in Shropshire and in Britain altogether. And we've got the common Calluna vulgaris, which is the lane common heather on the left here, and then in the middle is the bell heather, which has more discreet little clumps of flowers rather than it going all the way up the stalk. And on the right is cross-leaved heath, and they're all different species of heather that support appear in slightly different environments and support slightly different creatures. So when we're talking about heather, usually it's large expanses of ling, but it can equally well be large expanses of bell heather. So amongst the heather on the cypress stones are whinberries, and this is Britain's blueberry. And these are fabulous little things, and they're going to be ready to eat in August or so, and they're absolutely delicious. They make wonderful pies and tarts and turnovers and jams and jellies, and absolutely lovely things, and very easy to pick. It's a very low growing bush, and you can scrabble away there quite happily and pick a bag full to take home for your team. So that's a really good reason to go and have a look at the cypress stones. The whinberries were once an important harvest for the local people living there. The fruit was used for dyes as well as for food, and the locals would go up onto the hills and gather basketfuls of them, which would then be put on the train and delivered to the dye makers and to the markets. So this was a way of the local people earning a bit of essential cash when they were, they were subsisting on a bit of farming and this sort of thing. And they'd all go up, whole families of them would go up and collect the whinberries. And they, as they put it, they were picking their clothes off the hillside. The income from it provided cash for school uniforms and essential clothing for the children and all this sort of thing. So a very important harvest. Of course, these days, really much more minimal, but I know there's still pubs around the Cypress Stones area that actually still have whinberry pies on their menus, this sort of thing. So you can have a taste of it before you even go and pick your own. But I do recommend going and picking your own. And guarantee not many of them will get home in a basket with you. I tend to eat more than I put in the basket, but there we go. Lovely things. And in amongst them, you can find two other edible berries. The one on the left here is a crowberry, and this one's described as having a subtle taste, which probably means it doesn't really taste very much. and they're better if you dry them because it intensifies the flavour. And the other one is the cowberry, which is the red one here. They don't ripen to black, they're always red. And this what in Sweden they call a lingonberry. And locally around the Cyprus zones, they call it cranberry. And this one is very popular in Sweden in a jams and jellies, which can be used with meats, like as you would a cranberry jelly. They've quite a sharp taste, and again, very flavoursome things. And of course, all these wild berries very high in antioxidants, so they're very good for you as well. So go and do a bit of harvesting. And while you're about it, look out for some of the special moths. The Wildlife Trust website will tell you that when the emperor moth, that's the one on the left, the emperor moth caterpillar can creep from one end of the Cypress ridge to the other, the Back to Purple project will have achieved its original aim. These emperor moths and the fox moth down on the right here, both of them have caterpillars which will feed on heathers, fox moths also on bilberry, various other woody species, but particularly on heathers. And the emperor caterpillars are rather nice big green and black thing. And fox moths have these wonderful furry caterpillars, which very much eaten by cuckoos. They actually wipe the hairs of them off. They're the ones that might give you a rash if you pick them up. But lovely to see these little hairy woolly bear caterpillars. Other things that might be there are the bilberry bumblebees. This is one of our adoption species. You can adopt a bilberry bumblebee. If you go on our website, you can find out how to do it. Aren't they wonderful? They've got these fantastic red bottoms, and they're very dependent on one species, which is the bilberry. And when it's in flower, they're there like mad, nectaring furiously on it, and bringing it back to their nests. The dependence on one species, of course, puts them at great risk. Overgrazing on heaths and moorlands can really devastate the local populations. And maintaining the right habitat is essential to keep viable populations of the species. As a bumblebee, it has particularly small communities. There are less than 100 individuals in them. Much less than honeybees, you get thousands of them, but most of the bumblebees have much larger communities than this. So again, they're a bit at risk. At this time of year, when the bilberries aren't in flower, they'll be nectaring on other things, and bumblebee conservation are particularly keen for people to keep an eye on them appearing. If you live around that area, if you see any appearing in your garden, nectaring on plants there, they'd be very interested to hear about that. They're a lovely thing, and like the moths, keeping the habitat intact for them is essential. So this is why the Back to Purple project isn't just looking after heather, it's looking after a whole suite of really iconic species. The other thing to do while you're up there, once you've picked your webberries and you've looked at your moths and your caterpillars and your bees, is hang around after dark, because it's the most fantastic place to see the really dark skies. Up on Nipstone Rock, you can watch the heavens above you, the Milky Way, and if you go up in August, you get the Perseids, the meteor showers, and they reckon you'll be able to see a shooting star every minute. So sit on top of the rock, eat a few wemberries while you're up there, and watch the Perseids. Dark skies are getting very rare. We need to cherish them where we can, and that's a great place to see them in Shropshire. The next place I'm going to go to is Catherton Common and Cramer Gutter. And Catherton Common's our largest reserve, and Cramer Gutter adjoins it. So you've got an area of heathland with the heather and all that sort of thing on Cath Common, and some really fabulous species of plants, little boggy pools in it, um, and adjoining it the sort of wet meadow alongside of the Cath Common Cramer Gutter Brook, um, which is sort of wet pasture. So two very nice reserves side by side. And one of the interesting things we're going to find there is insectivorous plants. This one's a butterwort, and it's got these rather pale green leaves. It gets most of its nutrient from eating insects. It lives in boggy places. It can't get enough nutrients from the soil, so it's evolved to eat insects, particularly the tiny little gnats and things that are such a nuisance biting you. They have these rather delicate looking pale purpley blue flowers on a lifted stem, and the sticky leaves of this species gather the insects on the sticky hairs on them. So it's got quite a big leaf that the insects gather on. Very pretty thing, lovely colour. The insectivorous plants are rather endangered by airborne pollution, nitrogen in the air, particularly from ammonia from things like chicken farms. And not only is this causing some of the insectivorous plants to become vegetarian, as in they're eating, they're actually getting the nutrient they need from the soil, but it's also encouraging heavier vegetation around them. So they're getting overshadowed by too much nutrient in the ground. So not a good thing for them, and they're suffering quite badly from that. And we'll have a look at some more a little later on. Another of the special species you get on Cath Common Cramer Gutter is the golden ringed dragonfly. It's not a particularly uncommon one. We've got 22 different species of dragonfly in Shropshire, and this is the longest dragonfly in Britain. And the female has a particularly long ovipositor, so it looks as if it's going to sting you. It's got this pointy end on it. They don't sting. They might be a bit frightening as they rattle past you as they fly, because they're quite big, and they do make a rattly noise as they go. But they're absolutely spectacular and quite a glorious thing. The usual threats to them, the increasing temperature isn't helping them a lot, because between that and the rather erratic rainfall patterns we're getting these days, is threatening the bog pool habitat they prefer. So they have their problems too. This is another one that, particularly on Cramer Gutter, you'll find keeled skimmers, and these are nationally scarce. Very local distribution. It's a rare dragonfly. It's not common in Shropshire at all, but there's good populations of them at Cramer Gutter, and flying adults and the exuviae, the leftover skins from where the nymphs have emerged, still found there regularly. So spectacular thing. They have this lovely sort of downy blue to the body. Very attractive butterfly. Another place you could find good butterflies would be Wixle moss. Fens, Wixle, Betterfield mosses. It's one of the most southerly lowland raised bogs in Britain. It's the third largest in Britain, and it's internationally important, particularly for the invertebrate species you find there. Huge area of the most fabulous habitat, and it's really worth going and having a look. It's absolutely alive with insects. You can stand in the middle of it, and there's just acres of it, and you feel as if human beings have never encroached. Of course, they have on the mosses. There's peat workings there, Hand digging didn't really do much damage, but of course, industrial extraction of peat is a real threat to our peat bogs. And we're lucky, really, that Fens, Wicks, and Bettisfield have been protected from that and are now a natural England reserve. But it's absolutely glorious place, and we've got the Shropshire Wildlife Trust Wen Moss Reserve not very far away, and these are really important habitats. And this is one of the particularly scarce things we have there, which is the white-faced darter, and it's a spectacular little dragonfly. It's declining in the UK and has a very northerly distribution and very fragmented distribution. As one of its most southerly strongholds, Shropshire is very important for it, and the only Shropshire site it's recorded on is Wixwell Moss. So it's worth going and having a look at them just to say you've been able to see it. There's a thriving population there, and it's doing so well that in 2013, one record was of 100 exuviae, the leftovers from where the nymphs have hatched of this species, 100 of them altogether. They're not very good at dispersing, and larvae have been collected from Wixwell Moss and moved to a site in Delamere Forest in Cheshire, where they used to be, and then they died out, and the habitat there is suitable for them, so they're being moved. They won't do it under their own steam. Fascinating thing to see. They're absolutely lovely. And this is one of the smaller damselflies. This is a white-legged damselfly. This is one of my favourites. They're not a particularly uncommon thing. We've got 11 different species of damselfly in Shropshire, and you can see quite a lot of them around the mosses. But this was great. It's got these sort of broad, feathery white legs, and the male uses them to display to the female. So you can actually see a courting male white-legged damselfly waving his legs around to attract the ladies, and it was just a fabulous thing to do. This is a rat spider. This is another of the specialities of the mosses. They like the pools in the moss, and it's a large species. They're easily seen, and what they like to do is sit at the edge of the pool with their front legs in the water, and as soon as they feel an insect land on the water through the vibrations on the surface of it, they scuttle over and grab it. So it's not one that lives underwater, but they're great things to see. Really lovely, chocolatey brown with these cream stripes on them. They're quite spectacular. Another kind of invertebrates that you find particularly on the mosses and is very localized, very rare, is a bog bush cricket. And it's like a fat grasshopper, basically. But they've got these incredibly long, much longer antennae than a grasshopper. And the females of them have what appears to be a long sting on the back of them. And again, it's an ovipositor. It's what they lay their eggs with. So they're not going to harm you. They're absolutely glorious creatures, and they stridulate. They make this wonderful rasping noise with their rubbing their back, big back legs on their wing cases, and you can hear them making quite a distinctive sound. It's one of the few places that you can actually hear all these grasshoppers and crickets and things like you used to be able to when I was a kid. These days, there's so far fewer of them. Pesticides have put a paid to a lot of them. Industrial agriculture, lack of habitat, all these sort of things, and the drying out of places like the mosses, and we've lost these in so many places. And the grasshoppers too. I mean, how often can you walk through even a field of grass these days and hear grasshoppers all around you? This is a standard meadow grasshopper, but they come in this rather pretty pink and green form. And you can see all sorts of different colour schemes of them on the mosses, and they're well worth looking for and listening to. Lovely summery chirping sound of grasshoppers. And my last species for the mosses is the hobby. Not many birds in this talk, because really by the height of summer, a lot of them, they've gone into molt. You're not seeing so many of them. But the hobbies are well worth going and looking for. This is a lightweight falcon. They're very slim. They've got these wonderful long wings that look a bit swift-like, and these fantastic sort of red feathers around their legs, and the sort of moustache stripes on their faces. And their speciality is feeding on dragonflies, as well as swallows and martins. And dragonflies is what attracts them to the mosses. So you get good numbers of them hunting there, and you can actually see them catching dragonflies. This one has caught a dragonfly. While they're still in flight, they'll bite the wings off and eat it like a stick of rock. So really nice little creatures, lovely to see. And when the young ones are on the wing, like most falcons, they'll stay in a family group, and they get quite noisy. So if you hear a peculiar noise up in the sky while you're looking at your spiders and your dragonflies, have a look up, because it might be some young hobbies, and they're a lovely thing to see. And finally, while you're there, do make sure you have stout boots on, because it's a very good place for seeing snakes. And this is a group of adders. They're really spectacular things. They're not going to creep up on you. If they can hear you coming, they'll make off. But it's lovely to see them. They like these heathy areas, and they're really quite a spectacular thing to spot. And then they're not going to rush out and bite you. There's nothing to worry about, but don't go barefoot or in flip-flops, please. Sundews are another of our insectivorous plants, and these are roundleaf sundews, which is the commonest of the British species, and they're easily found on moss. Charles Darwin himself was absolutely captivated by sundews. He did drawings and experiments, and he wrote a book about insectivorous plants, which was published about 1876. He actually said he cared more about the genus Drosera, which is sundews. The word means dewy in Latin, because of the little dewdrops on it. And he cared more about this species than the origin of all the species in the world. So Darwin was a huge fan of insectivorous plants, and I am too. I think they're great. There's two other species of sundews. There's a great sundew on the left and the oblong-leafed sundew on the right. And these can be found at Wen Moss. It's the only place you can find all three species of sundew together. And because of the drainage of peat bogs for peat extraction and for use as agricultural land, particularly the great sundew, it's threatened. It's now has less than 20 sites in England where you can see it. So it's well worth going out and having a look for them. They're surprisingly small, quite tiny little things, and again, threatened by habitat loss and by the ammonia in the air. So see them while you can. Now, going to a completely different place now. This is Huntless Common, and we've gone away from the boggy bits, and we're going onto the chalk, the chalk ridge just outside of Oswestry. And Huntless is an absolutely gorgeous area of land, and of course it's connected up to Llanmynech Rocks, and then we've got other reserves like Sweeney Fen and Dolgar Quarry and Craig Sufton, all very close together. So there's a whole group of really lovely reserves, and just going to have a look at two of them today. So Huntless Common is really good for butterflies, particularly the fritillaries, and the area, Llynges and Llanmynech, have been particularly managed for butterflies, and particularly the fritillaries. And we're too late in the year really for the particularly the small pearl bordered and the pearl bordered fritillaries, which are often seen there and iconic species of it. But you can still see dark green and silver wash fritillaries, and lovely checkerboard pattern on them, which is what they get the name from, as does the snake's head fritillary plant. And this lovely sort of golden tawny and black marked butterflies. The identification of them, a lot of them depends on the underwings, and they have patterns of various sort of silvery patches on them. They can be quite difficult to identify, especially as they do the usual butterfly thing and go absolutely zooming past you, but it's worth trying. Or if you don't want to identify them individually, that's fine. Just go and enjoy watching them, because it's a great place to see them. A lot of work was done opening up woodland rides. This is the sort of areas they particularly like. They don't want thick woodland, they need woodland with gaps in it. So these are species that they're caterpillars feed on violet leaves. So you need some open habitat where the violets can grow. So a lot of management's been done for them, and they're doing really, really well there. Some other butterflies to look for while you're up there is the brown argus, which it's not an uncommon butterfly. It's actually a brown. It's actually one of the blues, but it's brown. It's a lovely thing. It's a wonderful sort of dark color with the pale edges and the orange rims. It's a very, very pretty little butterfly. And the caterpillar of this one feeds on common rock rose, and there's a lot of that around Llynges and Llanmynech, and you'll find them quite easily. And the picture on the bottom left here is the underside of the wing, and you can see they're actually very similar to one of the blues. The females of common blues, of course, are quite brown, but usually have a bluish furriness around, at least around the body, so you can tell the difference. The brown argus has no blueness on it. Another interesting one is the white letter hair streak. Now, hair streaks generally aren't one that you're going to find low down on the ground. They tend to be at the top of trees, because they're the caterpillars feed on tree leaves rather than plant leaves. And these ones particularly like elm. White hair streak butterfly has high conservation priority. They're rather hit by the elm decline, but they're not all that fussy. They'll eat the leaves of hybrid elms that have been introduced to replace the English elm, and they're quite happy to eat wych elm. So they're doing all right, but they still need a bit of a hand here and there. And the white letter, of course, is the W you can see on the lower wing there, and all the hair streaks have these little tails on the bottom of the wing. And it's worth keeping an eye. Even if what they're doing is flying around the treetops, they will occasionally come to the ground, and it's worth having a look, particularly around the bottoms of elm trees. You might see one there. I was lucky enough to see a purple hair streak come to the ground under an oak tree once, and I was absolutely thrilled, because before then I'd only ever seen them sort of twirling around the tops of the trees, and you really need a pair of binoculars to spot them if they're up there, or a telescope. But have a look with your binoculars. You should be able to see them, but keep an eye out for them coming to the ground as well. So they're lovely things to see. Always perch with their wings closed, so it's very hard to see them with their wings open, but as you can see, the underwings are quite distinctive, and you should be able to identify them that way. The other thing the area is very known for is orchids, and of course the summer is a wonderful time to be out and about looking for orchids. And frog orchid here on the left, which is a very strange looking thing, and strangely named. It doesn't really look like a frog at all. There's rather interesting green flower. I would say interesting rather than beautiful. But on the right here is a greater butterfly orchid, and these ones are absolutely beautiful. They look much more like you expect an orchid to look. It's quite a large plant, and it's got these wonderful white, rather flamboyant flowers. Both of them are vulnerable, near threatened, and declining species through habitat loss, herbicides used on agricultural land, and the lack of the damp meadows and sort of open woodlands that they prefer to live in. The greater butterfly orchid here is it's a wonderful thing. It's night scented. The scent of it comes out at dusk because it's pollinated by some of the larger moths, particularly the hawk moth species, and the smell of them is quite wonderful. It's worth seeking them out at dusk just to enjoy the scent. It's a very good year for orchids, so this year might be the year to make an effort to go out and have a look at some. This is another two orchids, a tway blade on the left. It's getting a bit late for tway blades, but worth having a look for. It's possibly one of the more understated orchids. And on the right here, the fragrant orchid, which has a clove scent, and it's also stronger in the evening. They're another one that moths pollinate. So go out. All the reserves around Oswestry have good orchid hunting, and several different species can be found there. Llanmynech, which is just along from Llanclys, this is a quarry site, and again on limestone. So again, very good for particular species of orchid, including the bee orchids, and these are the one on the left here, and they're doing very, very well this year. This is the only one in Shropshire you can find that is one that mimics an insect. It's another thing Charles Darwin was fascinated by, and even he found it very hard to believe that insects would be duped by what he referred to as so gigantic an imposture. Basically, the fat lip of the bottom lip of the thing looks a bit like a bee. The markings on it sort of shine a bit like insect wings, and its aim is that a bee will come and attempt to mate with it, and that puts it in the right position for the pollinia that carry the pollen from the anthers of the plant basically land on its head, so that the next flower it goes to, they're in the right. As it goes, they splay out a bit, so when it arrives at the next bee orchid, the pollinia stuck to its head are in the right position to fertilize the orchid plant. It is absolutely amazing, complicated way of getting yourself pollinated. Bee orchids have obviously evolved a little further because they can also self-pollinate. It might be one of the reasons they're one of our most successful of the Ophrys orchids. The one on the right is a pyramidal orchid, and these are again an absolutely lovely thing. They're not trying to con anything. They have a slight scent, and they're attracting insects by that to the pollen in the normal way of plants. But all the orchids have incredibly fine dust-like seed, and it can survive dormant in the soil for 5 years, but it needs to be colonized, if you like, by soil fungi before it can really do anything. The mycorrhizal association coats these tiny little seeds, which gives it something to live on as it germinates. They're so small, there's no room for any food for the growing plant in the seed. So unlike if you look at a seed, something like an acorn, it's got a great big reserve of food for the growing plant while it puts its roots down. An orchid doesn't have any, so it needs something to feed on as it grows its roots, and that's the particular soil fungus it's associated with. It's why it's very difficult to get them to grow from seed. There's no point trying to plant them out in your garden because they're just not going to do that. So enjoy them where they are, and go and see them places like Llanglos and Llanmanach, and sorry, but forget about growing them in your garden. They would be lovely, but they're not going to do it. Another one, this is autumn ladies' tresses. It's another vulnerable species, and again can be found at Llanmanach Rocks. These ones have it's rather interesting growth form that the stem of them sort of twists as they grow, and they have these white flowers and it's supposed to look like a lady's coiled tress. Again, very pretty thing, not common at all. Go and have a look at Llanmanach, under the quarry there and all that sort of scree and stuff. Great place to look for them. Absolutely beautiful. Coming away from the limestone and back to the heathers, this is Priest Heath Common, and this is a fabulous site. It's up towards Whitchurch, and most of the heather you can see here is bell heather, and it's particularly important for the silver-studded blue. This is an absolutely fabulous creature. It's a southern species really, and this Priest Heath is really the only place in the West Midlands you'll see them at all, and it's about as far north as they'll get. And they particularly like the bell heather. They always emerge in large numbers. Starting to get a little late for them, but hopefully we can still see some. And they have a very interesting family life, if you like. It's not really a family life, but as far as butterflies go, basically the young caterpillars will feed on bell heather, and then after they've grown a little, they'll fall off the heather and be adopted by an ant. And they have to have the right species of ant, which will adopt them because they're smelling like an ant grub, and they're making noises like an ant grub. So the ant will take them back into its nest and look after them. And this is where these blue butterflies grow to their adult stage. And while they're in there, they're not very good house guests really. They eat the ant brood, the ants' larvae, and they manage to convince the ants that they're actually going to grow up to be a queen ant rather than grow up to be a butterfly. So the ants look after them, and they clean them, and they feed them. And then when they're ready to turn into adults, when they've pupated, they hatch in the ant nest, and they don't pump up their wings and dry out their wings until they've crawled out. And they make the right noise, and the ants will help them and escort them out of the nest and out of the burrow and into the open air, where they pump their wings up, dry out, and fly off. So basically, it's a bit of a con on the ants, but this is how several of the species of blue butterfly survive, and the silver-studded is one of them. So one of the very few areas you'll see them in the Midlands at all. So worth going and having a look. It's a lovely reserve as well, and it's got lots of other things we can see. It's got lots of open ground. Of course, it used to be it's got runways and things. Lots of open ground available for some of these fabulous beetles, like the green tiger beetle on the top left here. And this is one of the minotaur beetles. This is, if you've seen my last talk about beetles, you remember this is one of the dung beetles, and they particularly feed on rabbit droppings. Lots of rabbits pre-seed, so it's a good place to see them. And another one that was mentioned in the beetles talk was the tortoise beetle. And you might remember this is the one that the larvae of it make a parasol out of their own dung, and you can see those there as well. So yeah, Priestheath Common, great place for all these sort of things. It's got some lovely pools on it as well, beautiful clear pools. You can look into them and actually see dragonfly nymphs running about on the bottom of them, and of course they hatch out to give you things like this. Is an azure damselfly, quite a few species of blue damselfly, and on the bottom right a broad-bodied chaser, and these are fairly common species. Broad-bodied chasers are expanding northwards with the climate as the climate improves, and Priestheath Common is a good place to see them. Emperor dragonflies, which is now common in Shropshire. They didn't used to be. They're another one that is expanding with climate warming. They're going northwards and westwards. And the ruddy darter, which was scarce, but again, the distribution maps are showing an increase in the distribution of them. So places like Priestheath Common, absolutely fabulous for seeing these things. And they're forming part of the chain of habitats that are allowing these things to expand their habitat. Of course, they're quite enthusiastic flyers. It's easier for them than some of the smaller creatures and the beetles, but they're moving. And with climate change, there's all the threats that go with it, but we're also seeing a change in the distribution of the dragonflies and the butterflies and the moths, and who knows what might turn up next. Keep your eyes peeled. I'm going to be spending a bit of time by rivers too, because there's nothing nicer than being by the water on a hot summer's day. And I'm going to be peering from bridges to see what's there. I'm going to be sitting on banks. I'm going to be having picnics, and I'm going to be watching demoiselles. These are another of the 11 species of damselflies, but these are the ones that have the coloured wings. And we've got two sorts. We've got banded demoiselles that looks as if they've got a thumbprint on their wing, and we've got beautiful demoiselles at the bottom right here that have the all solid coloured wings, and they're just lovely things to see. And of course they'll be patrolling the edges of rivers and streams, looking for mates and territorial displays, and just lovely to see them. They're little flying jewels. And one of the best things about summer, I think, has to be the damselflies. Damselflies and dragonflies are worth getting up for. I'm going to be looking at fish. I'm going to be standing on bridges, looking into the water under me to see what I can see. This is a grayling, and I'm particularly keen on them. They're a beautiful fish. They're related to the sort of trout family, these sort of game fish, and they're called the lady of the stream. They have this lovely streamlined shape, and the dorsal fin, when they're in breeding condition, is coloured in bands of pink and green, and they do smell slightly of thyme, so they say, which gives it its Latin name. The presence of grayling is an indicator of really good water quality. They have a low tolerance of pollution, and we find them in the Onny and parts of the Severn, and it's really good to see them there, and proving to us that the water is decently clean. Smaller fish that we might find are the bullheads here and the stickleback. Bullheads in some of the areas around Clun, you can find them quite often underneath stones, lying very still in the gravelly bed, and just fabulous things to see. And the stickleback, of course, have the sort of red flush on this is a three-spined stickleback, and have the red flush on the underside of them when they're breeding, and it takes you back to your childhood. It's paddling in the water and seeing these little fish. I just love them. Somebody else who loves them, of course, is the kingfisher. I'll be watching out for these two. This is the male one. The female ones have a bit of red on their beak, and most beautiful colours. Fabulous thing to see. And to finish off my day by the river, I'd like to see an otter, please. Evening time, if you're still sitting there, you've good chance in a lot of the rivers in Shropshire now of seeing an otter. Absolutely fabulous, doing all the right things in our much cleaner rivers, and of course sharing the fish. The final place I'm going to be enjoying the summer is in my own garden. Never forget that your garden is part of the biggest nature reserve in the country. Everything you can do for wildlife, from particularly not using pesticides and herbicides, right along to special planting for different species, making different habitats for different species. Fabulous thing to do. And I'm going to be listening to the buzz in the flower bed. And this is carder bees, top left, a marmalade hoverfly on the top right, common blue butterfly, and a small tortoiseshell butterfly. And the garden is absolutely alive at this time of year. So make time just to sit, either in your garden or a park, or take yourself off to somewhere like Hodnet Hall or Ashton Park that have got gardens that you can visit. National Garden Scheme has plenty that you can go and visit, and just sit for a while and listen to the buzz and see what wildlife is around you. This is a garden tiger moth. It's a decreasing species. You used to see them an awful lot in gardens, less so now, but watch out for them because they're quite spectacular. And this is its wonderful furry woolly bear caterpillar. Absolutely lovely things. So yeah, get out in your garden, see what's there. Hummingbird hawk moths. I've got one of those fuchsia plants that lasts for years and years, not one of the tender bedding ones, one of the big woody ones. And the hummingbird hawk moths absolutely love them. It's a migratory species, so we might get some, we might not. But if you've got fuchsias, watch out, because they're just like, they really are like tiny little hummingbirds. Well worth seeing. The other hawk moths, so we get top left here is a elephant hawk moth, and these are wonderful limey greens and pinks, and beautiful looking thing, and they'll be on the wing until August time, and they're usually around at dusk, so watch out for those. Magpie moths, they're a common species. This one on the top right here, frequently seen in gardens, but this is not spectacular. And the bottom right is a much smaller moth. This one is a particular favourite of mine. This is the small purple and gold, which is a rather prosaic name, but it's used to be associated mainly with limestone grassland and the sort of thing you'd find at Llanmynech and Llynfflas. But it's spread to gardens now, and it's feeding on mint and marjoram. So this is one, you're going to see it in your garden. It's worth looking out for them. It's worth getting out after dark and just see what's around. Don't be content with waiting for them to come through a window into a lighted room. Go out and have a look for them, because they're beautiful. If they were flying in the daytime, you'd think they were the most beautiful butterfly. But because they're out at night and we're not seeing them, and oh well, they're moths, I don't know much about moths. Go out and have a look. Some of them are stunners. I'm going to be watching new broods of garden birds coming out, being fed by their parents. Some of them, the robins in a good year, for example, will have 3 or 4 broods. So there'll always be young birds around. At the moment, our bird feeders are absolutely covered in whole families of baby blue tits, baby great tits, and a young great spotted woodpecker, which you can tell by the red top on its head. So young birds will be all over the place. And of course, towards the end of the summer, we'll get these wonderful fly paths of the hirundines and the swifts. And in a way, it's sad to see them massing like that, because it's foretelling the end of the summer. But aren't they spectacular? Screaming swifts, who'd be without them? And finally, in my garden, I'm going to be sitting out at dusk time, particularly, not only for the moths, but also for the bats. We get pipistrelle bats flying around the trees, picking up insects, and it's just lovely to see them. I can't hear them anymore, but seeing them flittering around is absolutely lovely. So keep an eye out for your bats. They'll be making the best of the summer harvest of little insects to get them nice and well fed. So when they go into hibernation, they'll have plenty of fat to keep them going through the winter. Because their main aim for the summer, have their young and get in good condition for the winter. They're always thinking one season ahead. I'm not going to be. I'm just going to be enjoying the summer. As usual, make a difference. Join us. Look after all these special places. Today I've been talking mainly about Shropshire Wildlife Trust reserves, because there's lots of other lovely places in the county. We've got over 40 reserves, and you can really help us to not only look after the ones we've got, develop them, but also join them up, add to them, keep wildlife going in the county. So have a think about it. For £3, you could either buy standard membership of Shropshire Wildlife Trust for a month, or you could buy 4 magnums from Tesco's. The price of a pot of Haagen-Dazs, just 20p more, you could have a family membership of Shropshire Wildlife Trust. It's much healthier, and it's something that will go on all year. You can enjoy it in the winter too. So have a think about it. Join us if you can. Thank you very much.